Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya. Sangye Jodan Zogi Shanam Sangye Padate. Drola Penju Sangye. Drola Penju Sangye Drupasha. Drola Penju Sangye. Drupar Show. Ho, ho, ho. Ha, ha, ha. He, hoo. Yeah.
Большое спасибо, Лама Глен, за то, что вы смогли уделить нам время и побеседовать с нами. Вы всемирно известный ученый-тибетолог, переводчик и учитель Дхармы. Одно из учений, которое вы часто преподаете, это 6 йог Наропы и 6 йог Нигумы. Не могли бы вы нам рассказать подробнее об этих учениях, в чем они заключаются, также как вы сами начали практиковать 6 йог, и расскажите, пожалуйста, о вашей линии передачи.
Thank you very much, Lama Glenn, for finding time for us and talk to us. We are very grateful to you, and you are a famous Tibetologist, famous scholar, translator, interpreter, and a teacher of Dharma teacher. One of the teachings that you normally give us is 6 yogas of Naropa and 6 yogas of Niguma. Could you tell a little bit about these teachings? What are they, and how do you start to practice them, and what are the prerequisites for practicing these yogas?
I think for us modern Western people, the prerequisites are very different than was the case with Tibetans. Generally, Tibetans joined a monastery between ages of 8 and 12, and often could not even read and write. And so then they didn't have any training in philosophy or mathematics or history, any of those subjects. Whereas most Western people coming to Buddhism have 12 years of basic schooling, and then often another 3 or 4 years for their bachelor's degree, 2 or 3 years for their master's degree, and goodness knows how long. It depends how lazy they are to get their PhD. So the prerequisites for Western people is quite different than we will say, in my opinion, and my not so humble opinion, because I'm not a terribly humble person. And it's very different than was the case with Tibetans. Lama Tsongkhapa, who is probably the greatest Lama in the history of Tibet, and who received and accomplished both 6 yogas of Naropa and 6 yogas of Niguma, and wrote 2 commentaries to the Naropa system. He said that we need 2 kinds of, you could say, preparations, or 2 kinds of qualifications. And one of those comes from the Sutra Yana. Sometimes in Tibetan they call it Parchin, the Prajna Paramita Yana, Parchingi Tegpa, the Bodhisattva Yana, those kind of names are given. And the other are some, you could say, special Tantra preparation. And from the Sutra Yana, or the basic open teachings of the Buddha, you could say, and Tantra being the more secret or more discreet teachings of the Buddha, from Sutra Yana, we really just need 3 things. And Lama Tsongkhapa wrote a small poem or mystical song on these 3. And in Tibetan, Ngejong, Jangsham, Tawa, Tongni Tokpe Tawa. So Ngejong literally meaning inner spiritual grounding or stability. Nge means certainty, and Jung means arising. That's sometimes mistranslated as renunciation, which is a silly word in English and has no real connection to the Tibetan term whatsoever. Epistemologically, totally wrong. And the second, bodhicitta, means really based on love and compassion, seeing the interconnectedness of all beings, being able to view or hold every living being sympathetically, with understanding, whether it's Stalin or Hitler or some person that we may have some kind of intellectual problems with, or Jack the Ripper, the murderer, or any kind of person that we personally have problems with historically or living today. We should learn to view them sympathetically, with sympathetic understanding of what was their modus operandi, the cause and effect of their behavioral patterns. And with the third quality, the umatawa, perhaps is a better word, learning to have cultivating a general understanding of how our sense of self influences our sense of other, and therefore colors our whole world or distorts our whole world through that little prism through which we view and experience everything. And I think if we look at the first of those Ngejung, I think from my personal view on them is the first. Often we see 5 kind of little steps, you could say, and the first of those is generating a sense of inner joy. And so Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chamo and other texts by him, as well as his Lamso Nam Sum, they follow the tradition coming from Nagarjuna and down through Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, and Atisha, and so forth, with at all times training one's mind to have a sense of inner joy or inner gratitude. The name for that in Tibetan is often called teljor, a sense of one's leisures and blessings as a human being, noticing the many good things in our life rather than being a grumbler about everything, noticing all the good things in one's life, especially how every experience can be a learning, transformative experience. And I think the perfect expression of that comes in a verse from Shantideva. If there's a problem and you can solve it, don't be unhappy. Be happy, just solve it. And if there's a problem and you cannot solve it, don't be unhappy. Don't whine, and cry, and grumble, and make a big fuss. Learn to live with it. In other words, Tsongkhapa is saying, to practice any level of Tantra, we need to transcend the negative habit of grumbling about everything that comes along and seeing everything as in a kind of a depressed, dark way. To understand that as humans, we have this great potential of taking every experience as an enlightening experience. Often in Sutra, we'll say, see any difficulty that comes into your life as a gift from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or as a gift from your Guru to your Lama to help you grow and transform. And as the Dalai Lama once put it in an interview I did with him, that this idea of joy being inner relaxation, is not something dependent upon external phenomena. If we spiritually train, we can just cultivate or claim our own inner joy. And when we do that, we always make the best decisions in every situation. Our joy carries us in the right direction. On the other hand, if we don't do that, then we get attached to this or angry at that and in conflict with that. And we're like a yo-yo going up and down on a string. So for people attending this 12-week course, I would say, please try to take a strong vow, a precept, a commitment. I will not grumble for 12 weeks. Then the second sort of meditation, which is done in the Nagarjuna Shantideva, Atisha, Lama Tsongkhapa tradition, always used as a basis of the 6 yogas, is on the death and impermanence, how everything is always changing. And this change is something wonderful and powerful. It's like the waters of a river. We can learn to navigate those waters very successfully to go in the direction of enlightenment. And the third is refuge, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And as one of my lamas put it, refuge in Buddha really means your own Buddha mind, noticing how you have Buddha power, the seed of Buddha power at the very core of your being. You equal Buddha, you equal Nagarjuna, you equal Tsongkhapa, you equal the Dalai Lama, the Panchen Lama. You have that same power. And Shantideva says this very clearly in his Bodhicharyavatara. Every Buddha was once not a Buddha, was just someone on the way to becoming a Buddha, fully awakened, fully enlightened. But they did the practices, they became a Buddha. If those dummies could do it, we certainly can. Even Einstein was a bit of a dummy in some previous life. We don't have to be shy or embarrassed about our dummyhood. Instead, we should ride the wave of our inner radiance, our inner joy, our inner non-dummyhood. And with the third quality, Asa often said, Tongpa Tokpe Sharab, the wisdom which penetrates to the emptiness or infinity or non-duality of being. How oneself, the perceiver, and the objects perceived are not separate entities. There's an interconnection between all things, and no separate entity can be found anywhere in the full spectrum of our experience. And I think 99% of Western people, and certainly anyone who ever comes to any of my teachings, my sessions, I do mantras so people who are not qualified don't show up. And secondly, of course, one should have highest yoga, tantra, anuttara, tantra empowerment. But that said, I often give tantric teachings to people who do not have tantra empowerment, because in Tibet, people would always know what it is they were getting into because it was a small country of 5 or 6, 7 million people, and people grew up around meditators and yogis and great lamas and so on. So I think in the West, it's important for us to dip our toe in the practice, like dipping your toe in a swimming pool to test the temperature before you jump in. So I usually teach something about the practice, and then people can see if the way it feels on their toe is inviting for them to jump in and splash about with full enthusiasm. Now, Tibetan texts all mention some sort of Tumma Mandro, sort of special tantric preliminaries for the 6 yogas. And often it mentions making many mandala offerings and doing some physical prostrations and doing bodhicitta verse a number of times and so on. So when Marpa brought the 6 yogas to Tibet, he recommended doing prostrations, etc., these preliminaries, with the 35 Buddhas as the object, as a visualized object. But as time passed, another 300, 400, 500 years, Tibet became increasingly, you could say, not sectarian in a negative sense of disliking one another, but more each of the lineages becoming more insular. And therefore, they gave up this kind of general way of doing refuge and bodhicitta and guru yoga. And they all designed a form of visualization which sort of, you could say, glues the practitioner to their particular sect. So if you're Nyingma, you do the Nyintik Ngundro. Oh, you've prostrated 100,000 times and done 100 of this and that and the other with that specific lineage tree, and you think, yes, I'm a Nyingtik Ngundro guy or gal. If you do Karma Kargyu, then Karmapa's at the center surrounded. If you do Drikung, Drikung's surrounded. If you do Sakya, Sakya's surrounded, and so forth. So as time passed, the emphasis on sort of becoming insular within each of the schools or sects became quite strong, and in my view is not appropriate to today's world. We should look at the earlier forms which did not follow those kind of I'm this sect or that sect. I could add that this was done in Tibet because when you joined a monastery, you kind of were being adopted as a kid. And so your food was covered, your residence was covered, your medical, your clothing, your education, everything was paid for by that institute. So then when you became an adult, they wanted you to kind of repay, you could say, by becoming a member of exclusively that institute for the remainder of your life. And, it might have been healthy in Tibet with such a small population and a more kind of clannish or tribal sense of being. But for us internationalists, it's obsolete. Tibetans had an expression, Lama re re chulug re re. Every Lama is his own sect, his own school. And this is, I think, very true in that every Lama receives different lineages from different masters and fuses them with himself or herself. But in general, in terms of the preliminary practices as described in different schools, they're more orientated toward creating an allegiance with that school, more than is healthy, I should say, for modern Westernness. Not that many Tibetans are very sectarian, but we see in Western people, there's a greater sectarianism amongst many Westerners than there is amongst their Tibetan counterparts.
Дорогой Лама, расскажите, пожалуйста, более подробно про 6 йог Нигумы и про 6 йог Наропы. Что из себя представляют эти практики, какова их история, и как эти практики могут выполнять современные буддийские практикующие, особенно западные практикующие, российские практикующие.
So the next question is, please, Lama Lam, tell us more, give us more details about yogas of Niguma and yogas of Naropa. What are they? What is their history, and how modern practitioners, and especially the Western practitioner, could come to practice it?
These two lineages came to Tibet in separate transmissions. SixYogas of Naropa was Marpa received directly from Naropa. And according to the lineage story, that Naropa in turn received them from Tilopa. So these great Indian Mahasiddhas, Tilopa and Naropa. So there is a little text in the Tibetan Tangyur from each of these two masters called the SixYogas. But Tibetans called SixYogas of Naropa. One could just as easily call it the SixYogas of Tilopa, because it seems that what Tilopa did was go through his favorite tantric practices and different tantric lineages. So we could say Buddha taught each tantra to specific disciples. Those disciples practiced, achieved realization, passed them on to the next generation. And they went in separate lineages like that. In highest yoga tantra, but 20, 30, 40, something like that are very popular and well documented. Others may still be there in secret lineages somewhere else that we don't know about. But Tilopa received numerous highest Yoga Tantra, Maha Anuttara Yoga Tantra transmissions. And each of those has a generation stage or a mandala practice with mantras and so forth. And in Tibetan is known as Dakye, arising as the deity, arising as that Buddha form, the Lord of the mandala. And each also has a completion stage or a tumo, kundalini. Tibetans, the Buddhist word is chandali. Hindus mispronounce as kundalini. And it has that sort of system. Every highest yoga tantra has as their second stage. So Tilopa basically took his favorite elements from the completion stages of half a dozen different tantras and wove them together into a single fabric, which could be easily practiced by any individual, and therefore enlightenment more quickly and easily achieved. And sometimes when I teach Tibetan Tumo around America and in Europe, because you names like SixYogas of Naropa are a little bit unknown to the general population, I will just, and because all SixYogas are built on Tumo or Chandali, which Hindus mispronounce as Kundalini, I sometimes just flyers for my workshops and retreats will just be called Tibetan Kundalini Yoga. In particular, if we go through all SixYogas of those two systems, Naropa and Niguma, both of them have Chandali, Tumo, or Kundalini as the foundation of all six. And sometimes the six become 10 by expanding the Tumo into Tumo practiced with reliance on your own body, and Tumo practiced in reliance upon the body of another. In other words, practicing as a solitary, lonely person, or practicing with a partner, a lover. And of course, some people prefer a lonely practice. And some people, they have a lover, a consort, a wife or husband or whatever. And if they practice all by themselves, their partner gets irritated with them and says, what? You're practicing without me? They want to practice at the same time. So we can, in other words, we can practice Tibetan Kundalini or Chandali or Tumo. We can practice as a form of sexual yoga, or we can practice it as a form of our own body being born from mother and father, have all male and female elements. We could say that the Tumo, as taught by Niguma, the great Indian female mystic who was a contemporary of Naropa. Some Tibetan texts say that she was Naropa's consort and that she was born in Kashmir and practiced in, some that she was his consort. And others say that she was his actual blood sister with the same mother and father, born in Kashmir. The ones that say she was his consort claim she was born in Bangladesh, Bengal, in the Chittagong area. And that area is near where Tilopa was born, which means in her biography, it just says she received the lineage from Vajradhara. But Vajradhara is a general name for one's own Lama, Buddha Vajradhara. So with Lama Pabanka, for instance, the greatest Lama of the last century, who passed away in Tibet, I don't know, in the mid-1940s or something like that. He's often referred to as Pabanka Dorje Chang. Vajradhara Pabanka. Any Lama who achieves enlightenment is sometimes called Vajradhara. So Niguma's text says she received directly from Vajradhara, which in my mind means she received from Tilopa. And therefore the two systems of SixYogas are very, very, very similar. There's two minor differences. The Tumo as taught by Niguma is a little more sophisticated. The structure is a little more precise, I would say. And also said that the dream yoga is more sophisticated or expansive, or however one wants to talk. Those two of the SixYogas, the Tumo and the dream yoga. I think Tibetans generally today, because of the strong high monastic element in all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, I think Tibetans generally put more emphasis on the generation stage, the mandala practice, and it's done as a kind of a chanting. And some of these are, 50, 100 pages long, the sadhana you chant every day. And a lot of Tibetans put more emphasis on the chanting of the sadhana of a mandala practice and the mantra recitation than they do on completion stage. They just do a little bit of completion stage. I think we Westerners are more completion stage types. All of that sing-songiness. If we want to sing-songy stuff, we'll listen to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or U2 or I don't know, Michael Jackson or whoever. But for meditation, I think Tumo with Mahamudra is more appropriate to the lifestyle and the needs of your modern Western practitioner. And I mentioned Mahamudra when the SixYogas are expanded to 10. Two of the extras are the Karma Mudra, the sexual yoga, and the Mahamudra, the emptiness meditation. Yeah, we learned a few more Russian words, Rolling Stones, Michael Jackson.
Я выучил еще несколько русских слов, как Rolling Stones и Michael Jackson.
So with my own students, generally I recommend that they do shorter sadhanas, not the long ones, because all that chanting stuff is too time consuming. And in Tibetan, it's very beautiful because, these kids learn it when they're 14 or 15 years old and they memorize it. Tibetan is most words are 1 or 2 syllables. So it's very beautiful for chanting, whereas Western languages, many words are 4, 5, 6 syllables, and it really doesn't lend itself to chanting in that way. And so I always recommend shorter sadhanas, and if you want to expand it, don't do it by chanting more words. Do it just by training yourself in those visualizations and remembering them.
Один небольшой вопрос. Дорогой Муllin, расскажите, пожалуйста, о том, как вы начали практиковать 6 йог Нигумы и Наропы. Расскажите, пожалуйста, про вашу личную линию передачи и ваши ощущения от этой практики.
Dear Lama Glenn, just a short question now. How did you come to start these practices yourself? And what is your lineage of transmission? And what are your feelings about these practices?
Well, I was Tibje Trijang Dorje Chang, one of the 2 great gurus of the Dalai Lama, 2 main gurus of Dalai Lama, I should say. Gave the transmission in, I think it was 1973 or 1974. I was there at the time, and so naturally I received that transmission. This was 1 or 2 years after I received the Yamantaka initiation transmission from Kyabje Ling Dorje Chang, the Dalai Lama's so-called senior tutor or older teacher. And so those two lamas became my two main, you could say, tantric inspirations in my life in terms of my practice, and my two main guides. I was very fortunate that they both lived 9 or 10 years longer, even though they were very elderly, after I arrived in Dharamsala. And we could meet with Kyabje Rinpoche once every week or so. He was very open to Western people. And so we could get private guidance and practice. And Kyabje Trijang Dorje Chung, similarly, we could meet. He had open audiences for a couple of hours in the afternoon. And so depending on what mood his attendant was in, we could see him sometimes more often, sometimes less often. And so I received my tantric lineages from these two great masters. Of course, I also received many initiations from Drikung Kagyu and Sakya, Karma Kagyu. I had a couple of important Nyingma teachers. But for me, these two, Ling Rinpoche, Trijang Rinpoche, were both living Buddhas. Their enlightenment, when you stepped in their room, was as obvious as a marrow, the lines on your hand seen through a marrow-biolent plant held in your palm of your hand. That's a Tibetan expression. It's kind of a transparent fruit. If you put it on your hand, kind of acts like a magnifying glass. You can see the lines on your hand very clearly, like looking with a magnifying glass, except as some kind of Indian fruit, which I never saw. Anyway, their enlightenment was as obvious, as visible as the lines on your hand seen with a magnifying glass.
I'm sorry, Lama, what was the fruit? I missed it.
Usually the English translation I've seen in medical texts is myrobilan. I don't know what it is. I've never seen one.
Okay.
And over the years, many other lamas gave teachings on the SixYogas, and also I received teaching from a number of other lamas on SixYogas of Naropa and also SixYogas of Niguma. And Niguma, I received two lineages, one from a great Gelugpa Lama of mine, one of my great Gelugpa Lamas, and also from one Nyingma Lama who was very adept in Tummo. And for SixYogas of Naropa, then several lamas gave teachings on it, including Dalai Lama gave transmissions and you could say, quite elaborate teachings on Tsongkhapa's Yiche Sumden, Book of Three Inspirations, his main commentary to Tummo. And Tsongkhapa, so that's, many people consider that one of the greatest texts on the SixYogas written in Tibetan, because unlike many texts which just give the practices the way they're done in your own specific school or lineage of transmission, and in Tibet there were a couple of hundred individual lineages of transmission, because Tibet was such a big country with such a small, sparse population that many of these lineages were very, very far removed from one another. So Tsongkhapa traveled extensively and did about 20 years of meditation retreat during his studies and travels, or maybe 12 years. And his text sort of goes through all the different lineages and sort of sorts out what is quintessential. And his Sungbom collective works also contains a Migrim, which means a structured practice text. In other words, a kind of simplified guidelines, exactly how to practice. Anyway, from my side, I received the transmission about 50 years ago, and it's one of my 5 or 6 favorite lineages I received from my very, very great masters. And Ling Rinpoche, Trijang Rinpoche, Dalai Lama, and these Dhamma Lobchu Rinpoche. After Ling Rinpoche passed away, Dhamma Lobchu became my root guru. And so he just passed away a couple of years ago. So for 50 years now, it's been one of my favorite practices. I think I've probably taught it 1,000 times around the world. I don't know about 1,000, but several hundred times, doing weekend retreats and longer retreats, teaching it to various groups in Europe and America, around Asia, and so forth. And people seem to get very clear, strong, powerful, inspiring results from this sacred practice. And usually when I teach by webinar, and I've done maybe 20 of these or 30 of these with different groups around the world, I teach once a week. And usually I ask one of my students to do a clarification session over the next days, just in case anything I said is unclear in the minds of the listeners. Because even though I speak with utter clarity, sometimes people don't listen with clear ears. And the commitment is for that 12-week period, people should try to practice what was taught that week. And for the next week, should try to do 30 minutes morning and evening, longer if possible. If they don't have both morning and evening, then do a longer one, morning or evening. But people shouldn't attend just for listening to intellectual words. They should actually engage in the practice, or don't bother attending, please. In Sutrayana, we say Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. In Tantra, so Gonchoksum in Tibetan, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And Tantra often we say Sawasum, the three roots. And the three roots, and when Sutra, the Buddha, it's one of the three roots, becomes the Lama, the teacher. The Dharma, which is a teaching of the Buddha, becomes one's own yidam practice, either generation stage or completion stage. And Sangha becomes the Dakas, Dakinis, Dharmapalas. The teachings of Buddha are said to be like a doctor writing a prescription. And the Dharma is said to be the prescription. So listening to teachings of an enlightened being, like a Buddha, and then hearing the words is like getting the prescription. Doing the practice is the Dharma, not just hearing the words, but doing the practice. And practice in the Tibetan world means tupa, sampa, gamba. You listen clearly to get a good understanding. Samba, you contemplate and chew it with your mind, so you can get the real essence of what's being spoken about. And Gampa, you do meditation, you do the practice. And that's like getting the prescription from a doctor and then getting the medicine and eating the medicine. Of course, listening to Dhamma is very good for putting some imprints on your mind stream, and maybe then, of course, you listened and you don't put it into practice. So then you'll go to the lower realms and be reborn as, I don't know, an anchovy fish or maybe a mosquito for a few thousand lifetimes. But eventually the instinct will bring some benefit to you, and you'll be reborn in the human realm and have another chance. But seeing as how you're already in the human realm, the way to get the actual benefit isn't to put a karmic instinct on the mind, is to take the teaching of the Buddha that was given, in this case, SixYogas of Naropa, put it into practice, and through the practice, accomplish realization. There is no way to get realization without relying on the practice. But usually what we do, because webinars I give have people in many different time zones, and people also have different working conditions and time commitments. Usually we let people have a few days to listen to the recording in case they could not listen live, because they're in the hospital with their dear old mom who just stubbed her toe on a table and has a cracked toenail, so they couldn't listen. at live, so then they will listen later. And but anyway, anyone wanting to participate should listen within the first day or two and then practice for that week and get some taste of it. Otherwise, it's just a waste of everyone's time. Of course, anyone can drop out anytime they like during the 12 weeks. If you, after the first 1 or 2 sessions, you think, no, I can't do this, then bye-bye, no hard feelings. A little bit like when I was sometimes asked when I travel around the West, can monks become non-monks? I always point out, for a monk to become non-monk, all he has to do is have sex or get drunk, break 2 of the root vows, or go rob a bank and break any of the 4 root vows, and he is no longer a monk. Becoming a non-monk is very easy. Staying a monk takes a little bit of effort. Same with Dharma practice. Becoming a non-practitioner is easy. You just let your lazy bone sink in and your apathy take hold and fall asleep at the wheel of your life. But make the effort to practice Dharma and you get the benefits of Dharma. Benefits here means liberation, bliss, and enlightenment, wisdom. Over the centuries, peoples of many social backgrounds and levels have achieved enlightenment with tantric practice. Many kings, such as Indrabhuti, have achieved enlightenment. Many great business people have achieved enlightenment. Marpa, who was a farmer, achieved enlightenment. Lama Dromdumpa, disciple of Atisha, who was a yak herder, achieved enlightenment. In India, Shambhupa, the tailor, achieved enlightenment by sewing clothing and doing the meditation while sewing. Tilbupa literally means, Tilopa, til is sesame seed. He achieved enlightenment as a sesame seed oil manufacturer. So it doesn't matter what lifestyle we have, whether we're rich, medium, or bottom of the ladder in terms of rubles, we can still achieve enlightenment equally easily. The only difference for enlightenment comes in the difference of the practitioner. And of course, something you could say, there are kind of karmic ripeness. Yawadi Myodo Dahlos and Japan Metrapurne Drova Chikyong Malupa de Zala Gupacho, Jancho Central Rimbuchi Makipana Kega Kikipan Yamba Mepa One Kondu Power Show.
Thank you very much, Lama.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Lama Glenn.
Spasiba, spasiba.
It was nice, this exclusive interview with Ross and different things. Thank you.